Story 1. The Wrong Delivery. It was a cold and quiet night when the doorbell rang. Jamie wasn't expecting anyone. She glanced at the clock, 10:15 p.m. She hadn't ordered food, but there it was. A delivery bag sitting at her doorstep from a restaurant she'd never heard of. Mystic Eats, it said on the bag. Jamie was confused but intrigued. Curiosity got the best of her, and she brought it inside. When she opened the bag, a chill ran down her spine. Inside wasn't food, well, not exactly. It was a small, old-fashioned locket, wrapped carefully in napkins, like someone had delivered her a message. But from who and why? The locket looked like it had been through years of wear. Jamie wasn't sure whether to open it or not, but something felt wrong. She picked it up, feeling the cold metal against her skin. The moment she popped it open, her phone rang. Unknown number. Jamie's heart pounded. She let it ring, but the silence that followed felt heavier than before. The next morning, the locket was gone. She swore she left it on the kitchen table, but it wasn't there. The only thing left behind was a note, scrawled in messy handwriting. You shouldn't have opened it. Story 2, Late Night Pizza. Mark was starving after pulling an all-nighter for a school project. He ordered a pizza from his favorite place. It was past midnight, but they said they were still delivering. When the driver arrived, there was something off about him. He didn't speak, just handed the pizza over and left without a word. Mark shrugged it off and opened the box. The pizza looked strange. The toppings were uneven, and the cheese seemed almost slimy. But he was too hungry to care. He took a bite. That's when things started to get weird. The room around him felt like it was shifting, almost warping, as if the walls were closing in. He tried to stand, but his legs felt heavy. He staggered toward the kitchen mirror, and his reflection wasn't his own. He saw the pizza delivery guy staring back at him, grinning, the pizza box still in his hands. Mark blinked, and it was over. The room was normal, his reflection back to normal. The pizza box was gone, as if it had never been delivered. He never ordered late-night pizza again. Story 3. The Haunted Takeout Bag. Samantha ordered takeout from her usual place, a small Chinese restaurant she loved. The delivery arrived, but something felt off right away. The bag seemed older than usual, like it had been reused too many times. It was crinkled and dirty, but what really bothered her was a faint smell. It wasn't the usual aroma of food. It smelled like something had gone bad. She brought it inside, ready to throw it away. But as she set it on the counter, a whisper echoed through the room. "Don't open it." She froze. It couldn't be real, right? She was alone in the house. Ignoring the chill running down her spine, she slowly opened the bag. Inside, the food was untouched, but there was something else. A piece of paper, old, crumpled, and yellowed with age. The message scribbled on it read, "If you take it, it takes you." Samantha's hand shook as she set the bag down. She backed away from the counter, but the lights flickered, and suddenly the bag moved. It crinkled on its own, slowly opening wider. A soft whisper filled the air again. "Take it." Samantha ran out of the house. When she returned later with her parents, the bag was gone. No food, no paper, nothing. Story 4. The Never-Ending Order. Kevin worked as a delivery driver for a small diner. One night, he received a strange order for a house way out of town. It was in the middle of nowhere, and the road leading to it was dark and winding. When he finally arrived, the house was old, almost abandoned looking. He knocked on the door, and an old woman answered. She seemed frail, but her eyes were sharp. "Come inside," she said in a voice that sent shivers down his spine. He handed her the food, and she paid in cash. Old bills that looked like they hadn't been used in years. Kevin left, but as he drove away, he received another order, same address. Confused, he returned to the diner, picked up the food, and drove back. When he arrived, the woman was there again, standing in the doorway as if she'd been waiting for him. "Come inside," she said again, her voice exactly the same as before. This went on for hours. Every time Kevin tried to leave, he received the same order for the same house. By dawn, he was too scared to go back, and when he checked his phone again, there were no records of the deliveries. The house was never on the map. Story 5. The Vanishing Delivery Driver. Lucy ordered food from a local burger place. The delivery driver called her when he was close to her house, but when she went outside to meet him, no one was there. She waited a few minutes, then tried calling him back, but the number was disconnected. Confused, she went back inside. 30 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. It was a delivery driver, looking pale and drenched in sweat. He handed her the food without saying a word, then hurried off. As Lucy closed the door, she noticed a news alert on her phone. Local delivery driver killed in car accident. The article had his picture. It was the same man who had just delivered her food. Story 6. The Missing Order. Jackie ordered a burger and fries from a new diner that had just opened. She waited for hours, but no one came. Frustrated, she called the restaurant, but the line was dead. Eventually, she gave up and decided to make something at home. Just as she started eating, there was a knock on the door. When she opened it, no one was there. Just a cold breeze and a brown paper bag sitting on the porch. The bag had her name on it. Inside was her burger and fries, but they were stone cold, like they had been sitting there for days. Story 7. The Empty Box. Eric was craving sushi and placed an order from his favorite Japanese restaurant. When the driver arrived, everything seemed normal. Eric tipped him and opened the bag, but inside, the sushi container was completely empty. He called the restaurant to complain and they apologized, saying they'd send a replacement. The second delivery arrived quickly, but when Eric opened the door, the same driver stood there, holding the same empty box. This time, the driver's face was blank, his eyes hollow, and he said nothing as he handed the box to Eric. Eric slammed the door, but the knocking never stopped. Story 8. The Silent Meal. Maya ordered Thai food from her usual place. But when the delivery arrived, something was off. The driver didn't speak, just stood there, staring at her. When she finally took the food, the driver didn't move. He just stood there, staring. She quickly closed the door, but when she looked out the window, the driver was still standing on her porch, completely still, his eyes locked on her front door. She called the restaurant, but they claimed they hadn't sent a delivery that night. Story 9. The Creepy Tipper. Greg worked as a pizza delivery driver for extra cash. One night, he delivered a pizza to a small, run-down house on the outskirts of town. The man who answered was friendly enough but didn't tip. As Greg walked back to his car, he found a $20 bill on the ground near the front steps. Thinking it was his tip, he picked it up. The next day, Greg found the same $20 bill taped to his front door with a note. You took something that wasn't yours. Story 10. The Disappearing Driver. Laura ordered her usual Friday night pizza, and as always, the delivery was on time. But when she checked the security camera footage, there was no sign of the driver. The pizza box seemed to appear out of thin air, sitting on the porch without anyone ever delivering it. When she called the pizza place, they told her the driver assigned her order had never arrived at work that night. The pizza should never have been delivered. Story 11. The Knock That Never Came. Every Thursday, Tom ordered food from a nearby burger joint, but this time, the driver never knocked. The app said the food was delivered, but when Tom went to check the porch, there was nothing. He shrugged it off as a glitch and went to bed hungry. At 3 a.m., a loud knock woke him. Startled, he checked the door. No one was there, but his cold burger sat on the steps with a sticky note attached. Always answer the first knock. Story 12. The Last Stop. Sophie was a food delivery driver, used to long late-night shifts. One night, her last stop was a house deep in the woods, far from the city. The house looked abandoned, but someone had ordered food. When she knocked, an old man opened the door and asked her to come inside for the payment. Against her better judgment, she stepped in. The door slammed shut behind her, and when she turned to leave, The house was empty. No man, no furniture, just dust and shadows. Story 13, The Phantom Diner. Ben ordered from a 24-hour diner he'd never tried before. The delivery came fast, too fast. When Ben looked at the receipt, it wasn't his address. It was for a house down the street, an old house he knew had been abandoned for years. He didn't touch the food, but every night since, a new delivery from that diner appeared on his doorstep, no matter how many times he called to cancel. Story 14, The Stranger's Voice. During a rainy evening, Sarah ordered ramen from a local restaurant. When the driver arrived, she paid and went back inside. But as she was about to eat, her phone rang. It was the delivery driver's number, but when she answered, it wasn't him. It was a voice she didn't recognize. "I'm already inside," the voice whispered. Sarah dropped the phone and turned around, but her apartment was empty. The food was still untouched on the table. Story 15, The Forgotten Order. Liam ordered takeout from a small Chinese place in his neighborhood. When the delivery arrived, the driver apologized, saying the order had been lost, but they found it after cleaning out the kitchen storage. Liam opened the bag, but the food inside was moldy, as if it had been sitting for weeks. He called the restaurant to complain, but the person on the phone said they had closed down 6 months ago. Story 16, The Late-Night Diner Call. One night, Rachel ordered food from her usual diner, but it never came. Hours later, she got a call from an unknown number. It was the diner, apologizing for the delay and promising her food would arrive shortly. When it finally did, the bag was old and crinkled, and the food inside was frozen solid. The next morning, she found out the diner had burned down the night before. Story 17, The Vanishing Meal. After receiving a burger and fries, Josh sat down to eat. Halfway through his meal, he went to grab a drink. When he returned, the food was gone, the plate completely empty. He searched the entire house, but there was no sign of the meal. Later that night, he heard footsteps in the kitchen. When he investigated, his half-eaten burger was sitting on the table again, perfectly untouched. Story 18, The Driver Who Knew Too Much. Tina always ordered from the same pizza place. One night, the driver asked if she had been doing okay and mentioned details about her life that she had never shared with anyone. Shocked, she called the pizza place to report him, but they had no record of her ever ordering that night. Story 19, The Cursed Delivery Bag. Mike received his delivery in a strange black bag. Inside was his usual order, but with a handwritten note at the bottom. "Enjoy it while you can." Confused, he ate the food, but the next day, his phone started ringing nonstop. Each call showing the same strange message. "It's time for your return." Story 20, The Endless Route. As a delivery driver, Sean was used to long shifts. But one night, he got an order from a neighborhood he didn't recognize. He drove in circles, unable to find the address. The street lights flickered, and the houses seemed to blur together. When he checked his GPS, it was stuck on recalculating, and every time he tried to leave, he ended up back at the same spot. Story 21, The Vanishing Street. Kyle was a delivery driver, heading to a house on an unfamiliar street. His GPS led him to a dead end, but the app showed the house was nearby. He circled the block again, but the street was gone. There was no trace of the house, the road, or the order. It was as if they had never existed. Story 22, The Empty Receipt. Jenna ordered Indian food and paid the driver when he arrived. But when she looked at the receipt, it was completely blank. No itemized list, no total, not even her name. Just a clean, white piece of paper. That night, her phone rang over and over, each call showing the same blank screen. Story 23, The Unopened Box. Brian ordered a pizza, but when it arrived, he noticed the seal on the box hadn't been broken. Confused, he opened it to find no pizza inside, just a note that said, "Stop ordering. Last warning." Brian ignored it and ordered from a different place the next night. But again, the box arrived unopened, and inside was another note. "This is your last meal. Story 24. The Black Bag Delivery. Lily received her delivery in a pitch-black bag that seemed oddly heavy. When she opened it, the food inside looked spoiled, but that wasn't the strangest part. Under the food was a layer of dirt, and buried beneath it, she found a small wooden box. When she opened it, all the lights in her house went out. Story 25. The Late Shift Curse. Zach was working the late shift as a delivery driver. He had one last delivery to make. But as soon as he reached the house, he felt something was wrong. The windows were all dark, the porch light flickering. When he knocked on the door, it slowly creaked open, but no one was there. As he stepped inside to leave the food on the counter, the door slammed shut behind him, locking him in. Story 26. The Forgotten Restaurant. Emily ordered from a restaurant she used to visit with her family as a kid. The food arrived just as she remembered, but something was strange. When she checked online to leave a review, the restaurant didn't exist. It had closed down years ago, but the food still arrived fresh and hot, like it had never left. Story 27. The Disappearing Meal. Jacob ordered pasta from his favorite Italian place. When the delivery arrived, everything seemed normal, but after taking one bite, the food suddenly disappeared from his plate. The plate was completely clean, as if nothing had ever been there. Confused, he went to bed, only to wake up hours later to the sound of plates clattering in the kitchen. When he went to check, his meal was back on the table, untouched. Story 28. The Delivery That Knew Too Much. Katie was waiting for her sushi order when the delivery driver called her, saying he was outside. But when she opened the door, the driver wasn't there. Instead, there was a small note on the ground. "I'm already inside." She quickly checked her entire apartment, but no one was there. Later that night, her TV turned on by itself, and the sushi delivery driver's voice came through the speakers. "You left the door unlocked." Story 29. The House That Shouldn't Be There. As a delivery driver, Alex often visited strange neighborhoods, but this time, something felt different. The house he was supposed to deliver to wasn't on his map. He found it by chance, tucked away behind a row of trees. The lights were on, and the house looked lived in, but when he knocked, no one answered. When he looked through the window, the house was empty, completely abandoned. Story 30. The Unfinished Meal. Clara ordered from a new cafe in town. The delivery arrived, but the food was only half-cooked. Confused, she called the cafe, but no one answered. As she looked at the food again, she noticed something moving inside the dish. A hand, small, pale, and skeletal, was poking out of the meal, grasping for something. Story 31. The Disappearing Delivery Driver. Ethan received his food and tipped the driver, who left without a word. But when Ethan sat down to eat, there was a loud knock on the door. He opened it, only to see the same driver standing there, holding another bag of food. Confused, Ethan told the driver he already received his order, but the driver simply stared, his eyes vacant. Ethan checked the security footage the next day, and it showed no one had been at his door all night. Story 32. The Endless Call. Lisa ordered pizza one evening, but after waiting for an hour, she called the restaurant. The line was busy, so she kept trying. Each time, she was met with static on the other end and sometimes faint whispers. When the pizza finally arrived, the driver handed her the box and said, "They've been trying to reach you all night." Story 33. The Unwelcome Guest. One rainy night, Ben ordered burgers for himself and his friend, who was supposed to come over. When the delivery arrived, the driver said, "This is for both of you." Confused, Ben explained that his friend hadn't arrived yet. The driver only smiled and said, "He's already here," before walking away. Ben turned around and saw muddy footprints leading into his living room. Story 34. The Midnight Snack Delivery. Kate ordered a midnight snack, just a small sandwich from the corner deli. But when the delivery arrived, the food wasn't hers. Instead, it was a plate of raw meat, glistening in the moonlight. She called the deli to complain, but they had no record of her order, and the person on the other end whispered, "Eat it before it eats you." Story 35, The Haunted Receipt. Ryan noticed something odd about his delivery receipt. There were names scribbled at the bottom, names he didn't recognize. Every time he ordered, more names appeared and the food tasted stranger. When he looked closer at the list, he saw his own name at the very bottom. Story 36, The Vanishing Box. Sophie ordered sushi, and when it arrived, everything seemed normal. She set it on the table and went to grab a drink, but when she came back, the box was gone. Thinking she misplaced it, she looked around the house, but it was nowhere to be found. Later that night, she heard something rustling under her bed. When she looked, the sushi box was there, empty. Story 37, The Cursed Address. Abe received an order for a house in a neighborhood he'd never heard of. When he arrived, the house was dark and no one answered the door. He left the food on the porch, but the next day, he was called to deliver to the same address. When he arrived, the house was gone. Nothing but an empty lot remained, but the delivery requests kept coming in. Story 38, The Unclaimed Order. Mia worked at a local diner, and one night, a strange man ordered food but never picked it up. She decided to take it home, but as soon as she opened the bag, she started hearing voices, soft whispers asking for help. The voices grew louder every night until the food inside the bag began to rot. Story 39, The Never-Ending Order. Jordan worked for a delivery app and one night received a strange order. Every time he delivered the food, the same person would reorder the exact same meal, even after he handed it to them. The cycle continued, and no matter how many times he delivered, the order never stopped. Story 40, The Bag That Wouldn't Open. Alyssa received her delivery in a tightly sealed paper bag. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't open it. Frustrated, she left it on the counter. The next morning, the bag was open, but all the food inside was gone. In its place was a single note, "It's too late now." Story 41, The Wrong Order. Chris ordered tacos from his favorite place, but when the delivery arrived, it wasn't his food. Instead, it was a box filled with strange, old-fashioned tools, knives, ropes, and tattered cloths. He called the restaurant to complain, but they had no record of his order. That night, he heard scraping sounds outside his window, like something was being dragged across the ground. Story 42, The Forgotten Meal. Jessie received her Chinese takeout, but as she sat down to eat, she realized the food didn't taste right. It wasn't just cold. It tasted ancient, like it had been left out for years. When she called the restaurant, they apologized, saying they had found the order buried in the back of their freezer. But their tone changed when they asked her when she ordered it. She checked her receipt. It was dated 15 years ago. Story 43, The Delivery That Kept Coming. Logan ordered a single meal, but every hour, the same delivery driver showed up at his door with the same order. Logan tried refusing the food, but the driver wouldn't leave until he took it. After 5 deliveries, Logan finally threw the food out. The next morning, he found every box piled up in his kitchen, unopened but with his name scrawled on each one. Story 44, The Midnight Call. Sarah ordered a late-night meal and waited for the delivery. When her phone rang, she answered, expecting the driver. Instead, it was her own voice on the other end, whispering, "Don't open the door." Confused, she looked out the window. The delivery driver was standing there, staring at her, not moving. She let the phone drop, but the whispering continued. Story 45, The Vanished Driver. Nina ordered pizza during a stormy night. When the delivery arrived, she tipped the driver and turned to close the door. But when she glanced at the receipt, the name of the driver was crossed out, replaced by a single word, vanished. She ran to the window, but the delivery car was gone. When she called the pizza place, they said they had no drivers on the road due to the storm. Story 46, The Delivered Warning. Owen got his usual burger and fries, but when he opened the bag, there was a note at the bottom, "Don't eat it." Confused, he ignored the message and took a bite. That night, He woke up to the sound of someone banging on his door. When he opened it, no one was there, just another note stuck to the door that read, "I warned you." Story 47. The food that spoiled too fast. Mia ordered sushi from a high-end restaurant. When it arrived, it looked perfect, fresh, and delicious. But as she was about to eat, the fish suddenly turned rancid, the smell overwhelming. She dropped the chopsticks and called the restaurant, but no one answered. The next day, she passed by the restaurant. It had been shut down for months. Story 48, the final meal. Max got his food delivery and sat down to eat. As he opened the box, a slip of paper fell out. It wasn't a receipt. It was a note with a single line. "This is your last meal." Nervously, he brushed it off as a prank. But the next night, the same order arrived on his doorstep, without him having ordered it. This time, the note inside said, "It's time." Story 49, the strange bag. Erin's delivery came in a plain brown paper bag, but when she touched it, the bag felt damp and unusually cold. She opened it cautiously, only to find a mix of normal food and something else. Tucked under the fries was a small, blood-stained rag. When she called the restaurant, they acted confused, saying they hadn't used that type of bag in years. Story 50, the missing driver. David ordered takeout and waited. When the driver arrived, he seemed pale and nervous, quickly handing David the bag before hurrying away. Inside the bag was a photo of the driver, but something was off. It was dated from 10 years ago, and under were the words, "Missing since 2014. Story 51, the repeating order. Sophie received her delivery, and everything seemed fine, until the same delivery arrived the next day. She hadn't reordered, but the same driver showed up with the same food. Confused, she called the restaurant, but they had no record of the second order. The next day, it happened again, and this time, the food smelled rotten, as if it had been sitting for weeks. Story 52, the knock at midnight. Jake ordered food late at night, but it never came. Frustrated, he went to bed, only to be woken up by a knock at the door just after midnight. When he opened the door, the delivery bag was sitting on his doorstep, cold and damp. Inside was a note, "Next time, answer sooner." Story 53, the empty tray. Elena received her food delivery in a strange wooden tray instead of the usual plastic containers. It looked old, worn, and covered in faded carvings. When she picked it up, the food inside seemed to dissolve, leaving only the tray. Later that night, she found the tray back on her kitchen counter, filled again with the same meal, as if waiting for her. Story 54, the delivery that shouldn't exist. Marcus placed an order with a restaurant he used to love. The food arrived on time, but when he checked online, the restaurant was gone, completely wiped from all records. He called the number, but it was disconnected. The food still sat on his counter, steaming, as if it had just been made. Story 55, the order that followed her. Paige moved across the country for a new job, far away from her hometown. One night, she ordered from a local diner. When the food arrived, it was the same dish she used to order back home, even though she hadn't seen that diner in years. She checked the receipt. It had the old diner's address and her old house as a delivery location. Story 56, the forgotten tip. Evan ordered pizza, but didn't have cash for a tip. He apologized, and the driver left without a word. The next day, Evan found the same driver waiting outside his apartment. He handed Evan a small, crumpled bill and said, "Here's your tip. Don't forget next time." Story 57, the vanishing receipt. Olivia paid for her delivery and set the receipt on the counter. When she went back to look, it was gone. Thinking she misplaced it, she didn't worry. But later that night, she found the receipt again, this time on her pillow, with the words "Check the closet" scribbled on the back. Story 58, the stale bread. Nate ordered a sandwich from a new deli in town. When the delivery came, the bread was rock hard, as if it had been sitting out for years. Confused, Nate called the deli, but they claimed they hadn't received an order from him. When he tried to find the receipt, It had completely disappeared. Story 59, The Eyes in the Bag. Kelly received her delivery and noticed something strange about the bag. It was wet, almost greasy, and smelled faintly of rot. When she looked inside, the food was there, but so was something else. Two small, glassy eyes staring up at her from the bottom of the bag. She dropped it in shock, but when she looked again, they were gone. Story 60, The Order from the Future. Matt's delivery came with an odd detail. The date on the receipt was a week in the future. He called the restaurant to ask about it, but they had no explanation. A week later, he ordered again, and this time, the receipt had the same future date. It was as if time had bent, and each order was arriving before it was even made. Story 61, The Delivery That Never Left. Amy received her food, thanked the driver, and sat down to eat. But a few minutes later, there was another knock at the door. She opened it to find the same delivery driver standing there, holding another bag. "You didn't pay yet," he said, though Amy had already tipped him. Nervous, she closed the door and checked her receipt. It was blank, like she had never ordered at all. Story 62, The Phantom Order. Leo ordered takeout from a new Chinese place in town. When the food arrived, it looked normal, but as he started to eat, he noticed his own reflection in the window. But it wasn't moving like he was. It sat there, grinning, while Leo's stomach twisted. The next day, the restaurant couldn't be found on any map. Story 63, The Pale Delivery Man. Mila ordered fast food one rainy night. When the delivery driver arrived, he was pale. So pale that his skin seemed translucent, showing veins beneath. He said nothing as he handed her the food, only staring at her with unblinking eyes. When she checked the security footage later, she saw him standing there for hours, long after he had supposedly left. Story 64, The Voice on the Receipt. Jake received his pizza with an odd note attached to the receipt. "I can hear you." It was creepy but seemed like a prank. That night, as he watched TV, the same voice came from the television speakers whispering, "I can hear everything." Story 65, The Missing Condiments. Erica ordered wings, but when they arrived, all the sauces were missing. Annoyed, she called the restaurant to ask about the missing items, but the employee on the other end sounded confused. "We haven't made wings in months," he said, and then the line went dead. Story 66, The Mirror in the Box. Jack ordered Chinese takeout, but instead of food, the delivery came with a small handheld mirror. There was no explanation. When he picked it up, he saw his reflection blink, though he hadn't moved. That night, strange tapping noises echoed from inside his walls. Story 67, The Uninvited Guest. Cassie ordered food for two, but she was eating alone. When the food arrived, the delivery driver said, "Your guest will be joining you shortly." Cassie was confused, but when she sat down to eat, the chair across from her creaked, as if someone invisible had just sat down. Story 68, The Disappearing Address. Dylan worked as a delivery driver, and one night, he got a strange order for a house in the middle of nowhere. He found the house, delivered the food, and left. The next day, he got another delivery for the same address, but when he drove back, the house was gone. There was nothing but an empty field. Story 69, The Watchful Eyes. Sophia received her delivery as usual, but when she opened the bag, there was a small, folded note inside. "We're watching you." Every time she ordered from that restaurant, another note would appear with more specific details. What she was wearing, where she had been. The final note simply said, "Look behind you." Story 70, The Spoiled Feast. Ben ordered a feast for a party, but when the food arrived, it was already spoiled, rancid, and foul-smelling. He called the restaurant to complain, but the person on the other end laughed and said, "That food's been sitting here for years. You must be mistaken." Story 71, The Empty Bag. Lauren got a notification that her food was delivered, but when she opened her front door, the bag was completely empty. Thinking it was a mistake, she contacted the driver, who insisted he had delivered it himself. That night, strange scratching sounds came from inside the walls, and when she checked the front door again, The food was back, but ice cold. Story 72, the chilling knock. Mark ordered takeout late one evening, but it never came. At exactly midnight, there was a knock on the door. When Mark opened it, there was no one there, but the cold night air seemed to carry whispers of his name. His phone pinged. It was a message from the delivery app. Your food has been delivered. Story 73, the missing fork. Alice received her delivery, but inside the bag there was no fork, just a crumpled piece of paper that said, "Use your hands." She brushed it off, grabbed her own fork, and started eating. Later, she found the same crumpled note inside her fridge, though she hadn't put it there. Story 74, the wrong name. Tom ordered food, and when the driver arrived, he greeted him by name. Tom hadn't told him his name yet. When he checked the receipt, it wasn't his name on the order. It was the name of someone he hadn't seen in years, someone who had disappeared mysteriously. Story 75, the vanishing utensils. Tina noticed something odd when she received her food delivery. All the utensils were missing. She went to grab her own, but when she opened her drawer, they were gone too. By the next morning, every spoon, fork, and knife in her house had vanished, as if they had never existed. Story 76, the voice in the box. David got his pizza delivered, but when he opened the box, a small recording device was hidden under the pizza. As he picked it up, a voice came through the speaker. "I know what you did." David threw the device away, but the same voice started coming through his phone speakers, TVs, and even his alarm clock. Story 77, the familiar stranger. Anna ordered a sandwich, and when the driver arrived, he looked familiar, though she couldn't place him. "It's been a while," he said, handing her the food. That night, she found an old photograph in her drawer. A photo of her as a child, with the same delivery driver standing behind her. Story 78, the order from the grave. Jack received a delivery for an order he didn't make. The receipt was addressed to someone who had lived in his house years before, someone who had died. The food smelled old and rotten, like it had been sitting in a grave for years. When Jack called the restaurant, they said they hadn't received an order from his address in decades. Story 79, the mirror reflection. Kate was enjoying her meal when she noticed something strange. Every time she looked at her reflection in the window, it didn't match her movements. Her reflection was still eating when she wasn't. She left the table, but when she returned, her reflection had finished the entire meal. Story 80, the never-ending delivery. Leo placed a large order for a party, but the deliveries never stopped coming. Bag after bag arrived at his doorstep. Even after he had everything he ordered, he called the restaurant, but they claimed they hadn't sent anything else. By the time the sun set, his front porch was piled high with food, as if someone or something was still waiting for the feast to begin. Story 81, the unlucky charm. Emma ordered food late one night, but when it arrived, the delivery driver handed her a small, rusty charm along with her meal. He warned her, "Keep this close. It's your good luck." Confused, she put it in her pocket. That night, she heard strange noises in her apartment. When she checked her phone, a message read, "It's your turn." Story 82, the cursed cuisine. Mark ordered a specialty dish from an upscale restaurant. When the food arrived, it was covered in what looked like black soot. Ignoring the warning signs, he took a bite. That night, he dreamed of dark figures lurking in his kitchen. The next morning, he found his kitchen covered in ash, as if something had been there while he slept. Story 83, the last meal. Jordan received a mysterious order of sushi with a note attached. "Enjoy your last meal." Laughing it off, he ate anyway. That night, he woke up to a figure standing at the foot of his bed, whispering his name. The next morning, he found an empty takeout box with a new note. "I warned you." Story 84, the delivery boy's curse. Nina ordered pizza, and when the driver arrived, he seemed nervous and pale. He handed her the pizza, but she noticed he had strange markings on his hands. "You don't want to know what happened to the last person who ordered this," he said. She laughed it off, but later that night, She heard knocking from her oven. Story 85, the food stalker. Liam ordered burgers for his friends, but when they arrived, he noticed they were all wrapped in brown paper. Written on the paper was a chilling message. I'm watching you. Every time he looked out the window, he saw a figure standing in the distance, just watching. Story 86, the fridge door opened. Sophia ordered ice cream on a hot day. After the delivery, she noticed her fridge was open. She closed it and didn't think much of it. Later, she heard the door creak open again. Each time she checked, the ice cream would mysteriously vanish until she found a spoon inside, dirty and half-eaten. Story 87, the unexpected ingredients. Jake ordered a pizza, but noticed something strange about the toppings. One of them looked like a human fingernail. He called the restaurant, but they insisted it was just a topping mix-up. When he checked the receipt, it listed extra ingredients that made no sense. Story 88, the unseen delivery. Claire received her delivery, but noticed the driver never made eye contact. He just dropped the bag and left. Curious, she opened the food to find a note saying, I know your secrets. Later that night, her phone buzzed with messages, each revealing dark secrets from her past. Story 89, the hollow foods. Ethan ordered food from a trendy place, but when it arrived, everything looked perfect until he took a bite. The food was hollow, like a shell. No flavor, just emptiness. The next night, he dreamed of an empty dining room with ghostly figures seated at the table, waiting for him to join. Story 90, the night watcher. Anna ordered coffee one night, but when the delivery came, the driver handed her a cup filled with something black and thick. Drink it before it's too late, he whispered. She ignored him, but later that night, she found herself unable to sleep, convinced someone was watching her from the shadows. Story 91, the ominous sauce. Chris received his burger with a small cup of sauce on the side. He tasted it and immediately felt ill. The next day, he received a call from a blocked number. How does it feel to be poisoned? The voice said. Frantic, he rushed to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him. Story 92, the eerie doorbell. Jordan ordered pizza, but when the delivery came, the doorbell rang with a deep, echoing sound. He opened the door, and the driver was nowhere to be found. On the ground was a note, "You're next." Later that night, every doorbell in his neighborhood started ringing, one after another. Story 93, the forgotten order. Lily ordered food from her favorite diner, but got a strange message saying her order had been canceled. Confused, she received a knock on the door shortly after. It was her food, cold and stale, with a note from the past. The diner was closed when she checked the next day. Story 94, the shadow in the bag. Sam received his food delivery, but felt something moving inside the bag. When he reached in, he pulled out a small, shadowy figure that darted away. Terrified, he realized that every meal from that restaurant came with an invisible companion. Story 95, the extra order. Tina ordered a salad, but when it arrived, it came with an extra container of dressing labeled love. She laughed it off, but later that night, she found it empty, and the taste was hauntingly sweet. In her dreams, a figure danced around her kitchen, singing about love lost. Story 96, the glowing food. Nate ordered a delivery of fried food, but when it arrived, everything glowed in the dark. He thought it was just a joke until he started feeling strange. That night, he found himself drawn to the food as if it were calling him, whispering secrets he didn't want to know. Story 97, the delivery from below. Olivia ordered a meal, but the driver was different. His skin was gray, and his eyes seemed empty. He handed her the food and said, "Don't eat it at midnight." Confused, she laughed it off. At midnight, she heard knocking beneath her floorboards, accompanied by low whispers. Story 98, the repeating receipt. Eric ordered from a local diner, but when the receipt arrived, it had a list of all his past meals instead of the current one. Each meal was accompanied by a date. Some were dated years before. The next day, a mysterious figure knocked at his door, holding the last meal he had ordered from the list. Story 99, the tasting notes. Carly ordered sushi, but inside the box were tasting notes written in a language she didn't understand. As she tried to translate them, she felt dizzy, as if the words were pulling her in. That night, she dreamt of a dark sea, where fish with glowing eyes swam around her. Story 100, the endless feast. David hosted a dinner party and ordered food for everyone. When the delivery came, it was enough to feed an army. As they ate, the food kept replenishing itself, no matter how much they consumed. But as the night wore on, guests started disappearing, leaving David alone with an endless feast and a chilling emptiness. Story 81, the unlucky charm. Emma ordered food late one night, but when it arrived, the delivery driver handed her a small, rusty charm along with her meal. He warned her, "Keep this close. It's your good luck." Confused, she put it in her pocket. That night, she heard strange noises in her apartment. When she checked her phone, a message read, "It's your turn." Story 82, the cursed cuisine. Mark ordered a specialty dish from an upscale restaurant. When the food arrived, it was covered in what looked like black soot. Ignoring the warning signs, he took a bite. That night, he dreamed of dark figures lurking in his kitchen. The next morning, he found his kitchen covered in ash, as if something had been there while he slept. Story 83, the last meal. Jordan received a mysterious order of sushi with a note attached. "Enjoy your last meal." Laughing it off, he ate anyway. That night, he woke up to a figure standing at the foot of his bed, whispering his name. The next morning, he found an empty takeout box with a new note. "I warned you." Story 84, the delivery boy's curse. Nina ordered pizza, and when the driver arrived, he seemed nervous and pale. He handed her the pizza, but she noticed he had strange markings on his hands. "You don't want to know what happened to the last person who ordered this," he said. She laughed it off, but later that night, she heard knocking from her oven. Story 85, the food stalker. Liam ordered burgers for his friends, but when they arrived, he noticed they were all wrapped in brown paper. Written on the paper was a chilling message. "I'm watching you." Every time he looked out the window, he saw a figure standing in the distance, just watching. Story 86, the fridge door opened. Sophia ordered ice cream on a hot day. After the delivery, she noticed her fridge was open. She closed it and didn't think much of it. Later, she heard the door creak open again. Each time she checked, the ice cream would mysteriously vanish until she found a spoon inside, dirty and half-eaten. Story 87, the unexpected ingredients. Jake ordered a pizza, but noticed something strange about the toppings. One of them looked like a human fingernail. He called the restaurant, but they insisted it was just a topping mix-up. When he checked the receipt, it listed extra ingredients that made no sense. Story 88, the unseen delivery. Claire received her delivery, but noticed the driver never made eye contact. He just dropped the bag and left. Curious, she opened the food to find a note saying, "I know your secrets." Later that night, her phone buzzed with messages, each revealing dark secrets from her past. Story 89, the hollow foods. Ethan ordered food from a trendy place, but when it arrived, everything looked perfect until he took a bite. The food was hollow, like a shell. No flavor, just emptiness. The next night, he dreamed of an empty dining room with ghostly figures seated at the table, waiting for him to join. Story 90, the night watcher. Anna ordered coffee one night, but when the delivery came, the driver handed her a cup filled with something black and thick. "Drink it before it's too late," he whispered. She ignored him, but later that night, she found herself unable to sleep, convinced someone was watching her from the shadows. Story 91, the ominous sauce. Chris received his burger with a small cup of sauce on the side. He tasted it and immediately felt ill. The next day, he received a call from a blocked number. "How does it feel to be poisoned?" the voice said. Frantic, he rushed to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with him. Story 92, the eerie doorbell. Jordan ordered pizza, but when the delivery came, the doorbell rang with a deep, echoing sound. He opened the door, and the driver was nowhere to be found. On the ground was a note, "You're next." Later that night, every doorbell in his neighborhood started ringing, one after another. Story 93, The Forgotten Order. Lily ordered food from her favorite diner, but got a strange message saying her order had been canceled. Confused, she received a knock on the door shortly after. It was her food, cold and stale, with a note from the past. The diner was closed when she checked the next day. Story 94, The Shadow in the Bag. Sam received his food delivery, but felt something moving inside the bag. When he reached in, he pulled out a small, shadowy figure that darted away. Terrified, he realized that every meal from that restaurant came with an invisible companion. Story 95, The Extra Order. Tina ordered a salad, but when it arrived, it came with an extra container of dressing labeled love. She laughed it off, but later that night, she found it empty, and the taste was hauntingly sweet. In her dreams, a figure danced around her kitchen, singing about love lost. Story 96, The Glowing Food. Nate ordered a delivery of fried food, but when it arrived, everything glowed in the dark. He thought it was just a joke until he started feeling strange. That night, he found himself drawn to the food as if it were calling him, whispering secrets he didn't want to know. Story 97, The Delivery from Below. Olivia ordered a meal, but the driver was different. His skin was gray, and his eyes seemed empty. He handed her the food and said, "Don't eat it at midnight." Confused, she laughed it off. At midnight, she heard knocking beneath her floorboards, accompanied by low whispers. Story 98, The Repeating Receipt. Eric ordered from a local diner, but when the receipt arrived, it had a list of all his past meals instead of the current one. Each meal was accompanied by a date. Some were dated years before. The next day, a mysterious figure knocked at his door, holding the last meal he had ordered from the list. Story 99, The Tasting Notes. Carly ordered sushi, but inside the box were tasting notes written in a language she didn't understand. As she tried to translate them, she felt dizzy, as if the words were pulling her in. That night, she dreamt of a dark sea, where fish with glowing eyes swam around her. Story 100, The Endless Feast. David hosted a dinner party and ordered food for everyone. When the delivery came, it was enough to feed an army. As they ate, the food kept replenishing itself, no matter how much they consumed. But as the night wore on, guests started disappearing, leaving David alone with an endless feast and a chilling emptiness. Story 101, The Repeating Order. Mia ordered pizza one night, but when it arrived, the delivery driver seemed confused. "You ordered this last night too," he said, handing over the box. Mia checked her phone and saw she had no such order. Later, she found a slice missing from the box, even though she hadn't taken any. Story 102, The Too Perfect Meal. Tyler ordered sushi from a new restaurant in town. When it arrived, the sushi looked flawless, too perfect. As he ate, he noticed the flavors were unlike anything he had tasted before. That night, he dreamed of the sushi chef who whispered, "You can never escape me." Story 103, The Grinning Delivery. Leah ordered food, but when the driver arrived, he was grinning unnaturally wide. She felt uneasy as he handed over her order and left. Later, she found a small mirror in the bag, and when she looked into it, she saw the delivery driver smiling back at her, even though he was nowhere in sight. Story 104, The Haunted Recipe. Ben found an old recipe card in his kitchen for a dish he had never heard of. He decided to make it, but when he took a bite, the taste was nothing like the ingredients. That night, he received a delivery from a restaurant he didn't recognize, with a note that said, "Thank you for following the recipe." Story 105, The Disappearing Delivery. Sophie ordered Chinese takeout, but when the delivery driver arrived, he handed her the bag and quickly left. When she opened it, there was only a fortune cookie inside. Confused, she cracked it open but the fortune read, "You will not see what comes next." A chill ran down her spine. Story 106, The Wailing Bag. Oliver received his food delivery, but the bag started to wail as soon as he opened it. He dropped it, horrified, as it continued to scream. When he looked inside, he found only his food, nothing out of the ordinary. That night he couldn't sleep, as the sound of wailing echoed in his mind. Story 107, The Eternal Return. When Ava ordered from her favorite restaurant, she received a strange message saying, "Welcome back." She thought it was a marketing gimmick, but when the food arrived, it came with a receipt dated from years ago, one she hadn't seen in a long time. Story 108, The Cold Delivery. Kyle ordered burgers, but when they arrived, they were ice cold, as if they had been left out overnight. When he called the restaurant, they claimed they had just made the order. Frustrated, he took a bite, only to feel a chill run through him, as if he was eating something long forgotten. Story 109, The Whispering Window. Chloe ordered food late at night, but when the delivery came, the driver stood too close, whispering, "They're watching you." Confused, she glanced at her windows, but saw nothing. That night, every time she looked out, shadows seemed to dance in her peripheral vision. Story 110, The Pizza Box Prophecy. Jake ordered a pizza, and when it arrived, the box had a strange symbol drawn on it. Intrigued, he opened the box, but instead of pizza, he found a scroll. Unrolling, it revealed a chilling prophecy about a figure coming for him. The next day, the pizza shop had disappeared. Story 111, The Strange Ingredients. Emily ordered a salad, but when it arrived, the ingredients were unfamiliar. The lettuce seemed to shimmer, and the dressing had an odd metallic taste. Later, she noticed small cuts on her hands and realized the salad was alive, reacting to her presence. Story 112, The Endless Tapping. Ethan received a pizza delivery, but when he opened the box, there was only a note. "Keep tapping." He laughed it off until he heard tapping coming from his kitchen all night. When he checked, he found nothing, but the tapping continued, echoing in his mind. Story 113, The Empty Delivery. Julia ordered a burger, but when it arrived, the bag was empty. Confused, she looked outside but saw no delivery driver. When she checked her receipt, it had the name of a restaurant she didn't recognize. That night, she received a message, "We're always watching." Story 114, The Hushed Conversation. Noah ordered food for a small gathering, but when it arrived, the delivery driver glanced at the group and whispered, "Be careful what you say." Puzzled, they all laughed it off, but later, they overheard their own conversations replaying eerily in the kitchen, as if someone else was listening. Story 115, The Tainted Takeout. Zara ordered food from a new place, but when it arrived, the packaging was covered in dark stains. Despite her hesitation, she ate it anyway. The next morning, she woke up to find the stains all over her body, as if the food had marked her in some way. Story 116, The Window of Souls. Ryan ordered takeout late at night. When he opened the food, he noticed strange symbols on the containers. Each time he looked out the window, he saw fleeting shadows pass by. It felt like they were trying to communicate with him, drawing him closer to the glass. Story 117, The Compulsion. Tessa ordered a strange combination of food she had never tried before. When it arrived, she felt an overwhelming urge to eat every bite, no matter how strange it looked. Later that night, she saw shadowy figures around her, whispering, "You're one of us now." Story 118, The Midnight Snack. Hannah woke up to a knock at her door in the middle of the night. It was a delivery driver, holding a half-eaten sandwich. "You ordered this," he said, but Hannah was sure she hadn't. After she closed the door, she realized the sandwich smelled of decay. Story 119, The Nightmare Meal. Leo ordered from a local diner, but when the food arrived, it was covered in black goo. As he took a bite, he felt himself slipping into a dark dream, where the food was alive, begging him to join it. The next morning, he found remnants of the goo all over his kitchen. Story 120, The Last Slice. Mia ordered pizza for a gathering, but when it arrived, there was only one slice left. The delivery driver smiled and said, "It's your last." The group laughed, but as they ate, they felt a presence in the room, growing stronger with every bite taken.